If you're wanting to upgrade your battery, you're going to want to watch this one. Whether you're building or buying your battery, it's important to know some key principles about how it works, because the numbers that manufacturers will throw out on their specs are not always related to an actual number. Sometimes they just say it can take a certain amount of amps, and that just means it can take that amount of amps without lighting on fire, but it does not operate efficiently at that amperage. I'm not saying there's anything bad about buying a pre-built battery. There's just plenty of dangers involved in that, just the same as building your own. So I'm going to walk you through kind of the steps you need to take when you start your build, and also how the whole battery will function and what you need to look out for. So starting at square one, how do you even begin to plan your build? I'll tell you right now, step one is obviously research. And if you're here watching this video, you're off to a really good start. I'm going to share about half a year of research in this one video. Once you've researched enough that you're really comfortable with the way that it works and you're ready to start planning your own build, write it up, draw it. If you can 3D model, do that. But whatever you do, don't buy a single thing yet. Make as legible of a game plan as possible and share that with people. I'm going to put links in the description to 2 different places to do this that I know firsthand will be great. There's plenty more. These are just 2 that I can guarantee will be a good place to do it. The first one is the place that I did the same thing. In fact, if you click on that link, it's the Endless Sphere forum. It'll take you to the thread that I started for this build. And that can kind of give you an idea of the way that I framed my initial plan, so you can review that to kind of help you frame your own. Also, it gives you a really good idea of how much your build is going to change in this process, because if you look at the specs of my build to begin with, I'm using entirely different parts for a lot of it. It turned out pretty differently. I was going to do 76 volts to start with, and now I'm at 104. There's a lot of things that you don't realize are limitations until you actually plan the build. And so if you plan the build and buy the parts before taking the step of telling people about it, you're going to end up screwed. The second link is to a Facebook group that I started specifically for the Black Sheep engineering community, because a lot of you have posted cool builds in the comment section, and that's just not a really good place for me to be able to see the build. You can't share pictures or anything like that, and I want to hear more about them. So please go share it in there too. I just love hearing that stuff. This is a very new channel. It's not even monetized or anything, so you can get help directly from me. I'll talk to you on that channel. I'm right here. I'm a real person. One thing I'll mention about forum manners real quick. Look around on the forum. Do your research on that forum before posting anything. Look and see if someone's already posted answers to your question. It's kind of frustrating to people when they've shared some information a few times already and someone asks again without looking at what they've already said. So now that we've established the importance of research and how to go about the research phase, let me start your research journey by sharing as much information as I possibly can in one video. Starting with what cells to use. The main ones I'm going to talk about are the 18650 and the 21700 cylindrical cells. So to cover these real quickly, the numbers do have meaning. It's just the size. The 18650 is 18 millimeters by 650 millimeters, and the 21700 cell is 21 millimeters by 700 millimeters. The 18650 is obviously a little bit smaller, but for the little bit extra size that you get out of the 21700, you actually get quite a bit more energy density. So I use 21700s in mine. This cell is definitely on the higher side of 21700 cell capacities, and it's 5000 milliamp hour, which is just 5 amp hour. As a comparison, the high side of a 18650 is more like 3500 milliamp hours or 3.5 amp hours. This one specifically is 2600 milliamp hours. It's nothing impressive. Some other options are prismatic or lithium iron phosphate cells. They are very durable, really cool cells. They're really popular for solar systems because they can handle a lot of weird usage and they last a really long time. But even though they are pretty size efficient, they're really heavy compared to cylindrical cells for the energy that you get. So they're not ideal as long as weight is a factor, which if you're building a motorcycle, it should be. Another option is pouch cells. Pouch cells have quite the range of energy densities and efficiencies, but in general, they can be as good as these cylindrical cells, but they're usually less good, and they're well known for being a lot more dangerous. I'm not going to say that they are, but I'm just going to say that a lot of people do say that. There are bigger sizes of cylindrical cells like this, which usually have a lower energy density than these ones, but there is benefits to it. If you, for instance, don't want to spot weld, you can get bigger cylindrical cells with threaded ends, so you can just have bolt-on bus bars. But in general, these two types of cells are the most common. You also need to look at discharge rating, but you don't necessarily need the highest discharge that you can get. And I'll explain that a little better in this next section, which is series versus parallel. When does voltage go up? When does capacity go up? And when does discharge go up? So to start with, parallel connections are when you have your cells attached positive to positive and negative to negative. So what happens here is, we'll say, so we're starting with a battery cell that has 3.7 volts, 5 amp hours, and 25 amps of discharge. So we connect two in parallel, and we still have 3.7 volts, but now we have 10 amp hours of capacity and 50 amps of discharge. If we put 4 in parallel, we'll still have 3.7 volts, but we will now have 20 amp hours and 100 amps of discharge. When you attach in series, which is positive to negative, like this, your voltage goes up. So if we add 3 of these together, we will have 12 volts made from 3.7 nominal volt cells. But our capacity will remain at 5 amp hours and our discharge will remain at 25. That does not go up as you connect in series. So for a total build, I'll use mine for example. I have a 28S14P battery, which means I have 14 of these cells in parallel connected with all the positives together and all the negatives together. And then I took each of those P packs, each set of 14, and I put them all in series, 28 of them. So that gives me my voltage times 28, which is 104 nominal, and my amp hours times 14, which gives me 70 amp hours. And my capacity of 25 continuous goes up to 350 amps. Another way of measuring the total size of a battery is in kilowatt hours or watt hours. So the way to find watt hours is just multiplying your voltage by your amp hours. So my voltage of 104 times my amp hours of 70 equals 7,280 watt hours, which is 7.28 kilowatt hours. To frame a reference for that, a stock Suron X battery is 1.9 kilowatt hours, a stock Ultra battery is 4 kilowatt hours, and the Stark Varg battery is 6.5 kilowatt hours. So you most likely don't need a 7.28 kilowatt hour battery, but my goal with this build is to attempt to get better range than I can get out of a bike that I buy. I'm not claiming to be better than any OEM company, but it seems like a possibility, and so I have to try. So the next question is, what the freaking heck is C rating? This is a question that I get a lot. It sounds complicated, but it's really not bad. If you're looking at battery cells online, sometimes it doesn't have a listed discharge, but it'll say 1C or like 0.5C continuous and 1.5C peak. Something like that, right? So all that is a way of telling you the discharge based off of the capacity. So the formula for this that I use is I times it by my amp hours. So for instance, this is a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, so 5 amp hours. So I'm going to times that by 5 because I have a 5C continuous rating on these cells. So that gives me 25 amps of discharge. So these batteries actually list the peak discharge at 45 amps. So we can do the same formula backwards to find the C rating. So we'll do 45 divided by 5, which is 9C peak rating. If you're confused at all what I mean by continuous and peak, they'll usually have two separate ratings for the battery cells. The continuous rating is the discharge that it can handle without building any heat. And the peak rating is how much it can handle without damaging the cell or anything in any way. The next question is, how many volts and amps do I need? It'll probably be easiest to get an idea of the power that you want based on wattage. Not to be confused with watt hours like we were just talking about. Watt hours is the total amount of juice you can carry with you out onto your ride, and the watts is how much juice you can push out at a time. The combination of the volts and the amps. So to frame a reference for wattage, a stock Ceron X comes with 7 kilowatts of power, an Ultra B comes with 12.5, and the 80 horsepower absurd version of the Starkvarg comes with 60 kilowatts. I have found, in my opinion, with the testing that I've done on the Cerons, with the Ceron X's and the Ultra B, the Ceron X runs really great at 12 kilowatts, and the Ultra B runs really great at 17 kilowatts. But for a full-size dirt bike like the Starkvarg or the one that I'm building, I found you need at least like 22 to 24 kilowatts to actually have it be that fun electric bike feel. I'm planning on running mine around 28 is where I feel like I'll have just the total absurd power that I want, but just in case, I'm building mine to easily take 35 kilowatts. So to find your volts and amps, I'm running 104 volt because that's what I decided based on lowering the amps as much as I could. So the math is 35 kilowatts, which is 35,000 watts, divided by 104 volts, and that gives us 336 amps that I need to be able to handle as my complete peak power at 35 kilowatts. My bike, in theory, can take 630 amps peak and 350 continuous. But it's no accident that my continuous rating is higher than my peak draw. In the research that I did, and I'm sure you'll hear this a lot of other places, the claimed amp discharge of battery cells is not always what you're getting. And the Samsung 50S cells that I'll be running are definitely no outlier in that scenario. In fact, they're one of the less good ones for that. But since I'll never be running them above their claimed continuous rating, I should be fine, because the normal riding of the bike won't even get halfway to that point, and I might have spurts of 28 or 35 kilowatts, and it's okay if that builds a tiny bit of heat because it'll be able to cool itself back off through the rest of the ride. So what's the weak point? The truth is, it's very important for you to pick your weak points. Certain parts can take heat and other parts cannot. Similarly, like we just discussed, some parts claim a lot more than you're actually receiving, and some parts actually claim a whole lot less. Motors can generally take many times their continuous rating with no issues at all. For instance, a stock Ceron X motor has a 3 kilowatt continuous rating, and they sell it from the factory with 6 kilowatts of power, and people constantly mod them to 15 kilowatts of power with no issues, which is 5 times the continuous rating. So if you see a motor that looks beefy and seems like it would work great, but you're looking at their continuous rating and it's so much less than you need, that is why, usually, and I'm not saying buy it anyways, but do more research as to what people are actually doing with that motor and see if it'll work. In contrast, controllers often have heating issues if you push them anywhere near their ratings. I would buy one much beefier than you intend to use. Mine, for instance, claims 800 amps and I'll be pulling 350 at peak power. So I should have plenty of room for fudgery in those numbers without getting pissed because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. As we just discussed, battery cells often claim higher discharge numbers than they're giving you. But another thing to think about with the battery is, for you guys that want to buy a battery, there's a lot of fudging numbers that the people building the batteries are doing. They're buying cells that have numbers higher than they're receiving, so they could be passing those numbers on to you. Another thing that I've seen a lot that they'll do is they will build it using parts that are not rated for anywhere near the amps that they claim, but they'll build the battery and they'll run it at that amps and it won't explode, so they'll sell it that way. But that causes a lot of other issues with things like efficiency and voltage drop, which I'll get into a lot deeper here in a minute. The next question is, do watts equal acceleration? Not entirely. When you're at low RPM, the motor is sending a very small amount of volts to the motor, which means lower torque. This is made up for with phase amps. You need to get a controller that can pass enough phase amps to fully saturate your motor, or else it doesn't matter what your wattage is, that thing can still take off real slow from the line. Phase amps equal torque. I won't go super big into this in this video because I'm trying to focus mainly on the battery, but in the research that I did, I found that I needed about 1200 phase amps to fully saturate the QS138 V370H that I'm putting in my bike. The controller that I bought is the ND96 1800, which is 1800 phase amps at 96 volts. So again, I'm buying better than I should need because I don't want to be rebuying. What wire gauge should you use? This is a question with so many different answers depending on who you ask. For this specific use case, the most generally agreed upon answer that I found is 20 amps per millimeter squared of copper at a minimum. At that size, you will probably see a bit of voltage drop. I kept mine about double that or half the amperage. So my main discharge wires are 2 gauge, which is 35 millimeters squared. So at 20 amps per millimeter squared, 2 gauge would give me 700 amps of discharge, which is double what I'm using. But I want the ideal situation, which is 10 amps per millimeter squared, which comes out to be 350, which is right in line with my continuous rating for my battery cells, which was at like 20 amps higher than my peak draw. So we should be good there without any voltage drop. A common misconception that I hear a whole lot is more volts equals less amps, right? And in some cases, yes, but in the case of building electric dirt bikes, there's a very important distinction. So for instance, if you have a 72 volt bike and it takes 45 volts and 30 amps to go 25 miles an hour. If you upgrade that bike to a 96 volt system, it'll still take 45 volts and 30 amps to go 25 miles an hour. But what will change is you'll have a lot higher top speed. The way that we can take advantage of that higher voltage is by gearing the bike down. So we have a lot more torque and acceleration at lower speeds, and our top speed gets back down to the range as it was at the lower voltage. That's why if you look at my bike with the QS138, and it has that little gear housing on the front of it, and that's all the gearing that you need to drop it to the right size. That's why that gearbox is so much smaller than you see on the Stark Varg, because it's running a 360 volt system, which only works if you gear it down a whole lot to where all that voltage is brought down to the same speed range. So with the 96 volt system and that new gearing, now it's going to take 55 volts and 20 amps to go 25 miles an hour. So the benefit to increasing your voltage and lowering your amps is amps are what really puts strain on the system. Pushing high amps through your wires is what causes voltage drop and can cause a lot of problems. So now I've mentioned voltage drop probably 3 or 4 times, and if you don't know what that is, you're probably really frustrated right now, but I'm getting to it right now. In short, heat isn't generated for free. When a wire heats up, it's converting power into heat, and that is measured by voltage drop. If you read the power that you're sending and you read the power that you're getting at the motor, the voltage will be a little bit lower if you don't have a very efficient system. It's not usually much. Like if you had 1 volt of voltage drop on a 96 volt system, that's a lot. So not only are you building heat where you don't want it when you have voltage drop, but you're also losing efficiency, because for every however many volts you're sending to the motor, you're just burning that percentage of it for free. It's going into heat and you're not able to use that at the motor, so your ride day is shorter. So when you're talking about saving weight from your bike, don't skimp on any of the copper. And if you're sweating that little bit of weight that much, you're better off to do a little bit smaller of a battery and run it at peak efficiency. So now let's get to these guys. So the way that I've done this battery is a little bit more confusing to explain because of the way that I'm running my bus bars, but I think you'll get it and why I did that. So your parallel connections do not need to take a lot of amps. All they're doing is balancing those 14 cells, in my case, amongst each other so that the voltage is the same. That's the only current that is passing between those cells in a parallel direction. Your series connections take the full force of your amperage. This is another common misconception. A lot of people think that your amperage is compounded as you build series connection because your voltage is, but the amp draw is 100% from the first series connection to the last one. So all of your series connections need to be built to take your amperage. So here, for example, each of these rows is one parallel connection, and the row that it's attached to is another parallel connection that it is transferring in series. So since I have one single bus bar delivering all of that, it needs to take the 336 amps without issues. If you're connecting each cell of your parallel pack directly to the adjacent cell of the next parallel pack in series, then each of those 14 connecting wires need to take 1/14 of the power. When figuring your amps for your connections, do the same math as the wires. For mine, my smallest series connection, which is this one right here, spans about 6¼ inches of pure copper, which is 159 millimeters. So that comes out to an ideal load of 795 amps, using the formula of 10 amps per millimeter squared. Obviously, that is way more than I need, and that's my smallest connection, and these ones are a lot more than that, but that's just because I made my battery as efficiently as I could when I designed it. And then when it came out to me only needing like 0.2 millimeter thick copper, I kind of just decided that anything less than 0.5 millimeters might not hold up well just because it's so thin. I wanted this thick stuff, and that's a decision that you can make, but I'll get into how and where I bought these here in a minute. I need to touch on the BMS since it's a battery video. This one is the Ant BMS. It's probably the most commonly used. This thing was like 110 bucks, and it handles up to 30 S, 420 amps continuous, and 1050 amps peak. For 10 seconds, it can handle 1050 amps, 10 seconds at a time. Pretty cool for the price. And so the way that the BMS works is you hook all these wires to each of your parallel packs, and your parallel packs are already balancing each cell in the pack, but the BMS balances each of those to each other. So there's two main kinds of BMSs. There's passive balancing and active balancing. This one's a passive balancing BMS, and what that means is when you plug it into the charger, as it charges it up, it balances the parallel packs, and it balances at a very low amperage. I think it was not even a full amp, and so that's why the wires are so tiny. An active BMS balances the packs the whole time you're charging or discharging, which sounds automatically better, and it is in most cases, but it's not necessary usually. The time that I would recommend and almost say that it's necessary to have an active balancing BMS is if you're using old cells that have been used once already, because cells degrade at different rates. So as you're discharging the battery, some cells will drop a lot faster than others, and it'll get out of balance pretty quick. And so as soon as the first cell reaches the low end of the voltage, the BMS is going to cut off the power. So you could have some cells at half charge still, or like 3/4 of charge still, when one battery is toast. So then you're just packing a whole bunch of weight around for no reason. So an active BMS helps level that out a lot more through the ride so that you can actually use the whole battery pack when the cells are doing that. So I'm going to group the custom parts that I have up with how did I make it not square, because those two kind of correlate together. The goal of this video is more to cover how to do it more compared to how I'm doing mine. I'm working on another video that's just specifically how I'm doing mine and the exact build process for mine. But I've had an insane amount of people asking about the custom parts that I have, so I'm definitely going to share that in this one too. First off, weird shaped batteries like this take a lot more time and skill to build and assemble than square ones. And so big manufacturers will usually just make them straight and square because it's a lot cheaper to pay someone to make it that way. It's all about manufacturing costs. In a lot of ways, they have better access to better tools and can make bigger investments in tooling up front on things. So there's a lot of ways that big manufacturers can build better batteries than us, but there's actually a lot of ways that you can build your battery better than the manufacturers, just because you don't have to be efficient in the building process, because you're not just trying to make money, you're trying to build something good. So that's actually a cool advantage that we have as more hobbyists that is really prevalent in this case. So to talk about my custom parts, I'll preface this by saying if you can't do any CAD modeling and you want your battery to be different than mine, then it'll be pretty hard to go down this route. You can do everything else that we've talked about up to this point with just buying off-the-shelf stuff, and you can buy off-the-shelf cell holders and off-the-shelf connections. You can just buy nickel and copper strips and weld your own connections there. You could get the bigger cylindrical cells that you can just screw the bus bars onto. There's lots of options that way. This specific option, it's going to be hard if you don't have the CAD. And The reason I say if it's any different than mine is because I'm posting all of the CAD files to this battery build on my website. I'll put a link in the description for that. I have just a page dedicated to posting all of that stuff and the information about the build and whatnot. If this exact size works with your bike, then have at it. You can have the exact same setup that I did. So I 3D modeled my own cell holders, and I wanted these ribs that come up between the bus bars that keep them from touching, because they're so close, and I didn't want any chance of them touching together, because if they make a connection, that is very bad news. So because of those ribs, it took what was 4 common parts and made them all different from each other. So I had to have 4 separate parts, and that made it a little bit rough when I had a CNC router cut, because if you know anything about machining, drawing up the toolpath in Mastercam is the most time-consuming part of making the part, and every single part had to have a new toolpath made for it. So it would definitely be a lot cheaper just to get rid of those little ribs. If you have an FDM 3D printer that can do that shape, it would probably work good. So I had that done at a machine shop here locally. I have a really great relationship with them, so I just came in there and helped them knock it out, and they didn't charge me a bunch of money. The connections I bought from a place in China. I got in contact with them through Alibaba. I'll make sure to post the link to their ad on Alibaba. If it's not in the description, it's on the build page on the website. So total for that ended up being like $190 shipped to me, and about 80 of that was shipping. I'll definitely be ordering from them again next time I build a battery, because I could not have got nearly the amps if I was trying to connect them with my own separate strips. These do really good on efficiency, which is awesome. There was some hiccups on it, or still is, I guess. First off, they forgot to include the sample pieces that I ordered. I ordered a bunch of those little, just the connections that were in there, because I wanted to practice on those before starting on this. I have a video where I practiced all the spot welding on. They forgot to send those, so I had to pay separate shipping for them to send them again, and then just found out I should have took inventory of everything they sent before I'm building the battery, but the last bus bar I go to put on the battery, they had welded the connections on backwards, and so it just doesn't work. And I contacted them, and they responded quickly, and they said that they'll send me the correct one, and they're really great to work with, but it is frustrating because it takes weeks to get stuff from them. So I got more stuff to do on this battery still, but we're going to be waiting on that one connection for a couple weeks, and that is rough. So I just say that to say this isn't me telling you that you're guaranteed a good experience if you do this. So there's definitely a lot more info that I have to share that I can't cram into this one video. I want it to be a quick kind of overview on everything you need to know to start your build. So keep a lookout for more in-depth videos that I'll be dropping here soon. And make sure to add anything that you want included in those videos down in the comment section right now, so I can add those things into my list. Also, check out this video that's hopefully up here somewhere to see the rest of the initial build plan. And by the time you're watching this video, there could be a bunch more out, so check out all those. And I'm going to be finishing out this bike build and testing it, and I don't think you want to miss that, so make sure to subscribe. But for now, I gotta